Why did no one look at her when she entered the briefing room, almost as if she didn't exist? The chair reserved for her sat in the far corner, flimsy and isolated, the kind of seat given to visitors, interns, or people who didn't matter. But she walked toward it without hesitation, her boots silent on the plascrete floor. She looked small compared to the broad-shouldered soldiers crowding the table, but there was a steadiness in her steps, controlled, measured, intentional, like someone who had long ago learned how to shrink her presence without ever surrendering it. No one at Fob Erebus knew who she was. That was the point. Colonel Thorne didn't bother to hide his disdain. He stood at the holographic table like a man addressing a room full of loyal disciples, not a single doubt in his mind and certainly no space for hers. When the laughter began, quiet at first, then bolder, it rolled past her like dust stirred by passing trucks. Most of the mockery wasn't even subtle. A civilian, a logistics auditor, a pencil pusher, an outsider. They didn't see the depth in her eyes when she sat down, didn't see how she scanned every projection, every sensor feed, every gap in their defenses. They only saw what they wanted to see. Just the new girl. Colonel Thorne guided the briefing like a man convinced the universe bent around his certainty. The insurgency is probing western sectors, he declared, gesturing at red markers pulsing across the 3D terrain map. We maintain full kinetic dominance. Rhino's platoon will push them back again. Men chuckled. Someone muttered, like always. She noticed something none of them did. The probes weren't spreading outward, they were spiraling inward. Clean arcs, repeated intervals, a tunnel pattern, a map, a warning. She didn't raise her hand, she just spoke. "Colonel, what's the status of the Elysium relay?" she asked. The room fell still, not because her question mattered, but because she had dared ask it. Thorne turned slowly, eyebrows raised as if a child had interrupted class. "That's classified," he said sharply, "and irrelevant." "The relay monitors subterranean resonance," she replied calmly. "Their movements align with the weakest points in the bedrock. They're not testing your fence, they're mapping your foundation." The derision came instantly, a scoff, a snort, a loud laugh Rhino didn't bother disguising. "As if we wouldn't notice tunnels," Specialist Sharma drawled. "The seismic logs are clean, trust me." "Echoes don't form a concentric inward spiral," she answered softly. That was when the temperature of the room changed. Not for them, for her. They dismissed her with a wave, a smirk, a shrug. Thorne's voice cut her off, final and cold. "You're here to observe, Miss Vance, nothing more." Miss Vance, as if even her name was an inconvenience. She leaned back, folding into silence. They'd already made up their minds. And yet she'd seen it again. That pattern, those subtle distortions, like a whisper from the ground itself trying to warn someone, anyone who would listen. The briefing moved on, louder and more dismissive now. She sat quietly, ignored, but inside her something shifted. A familiar ache, the ache of being underestimated, judged by surface, written off before the first page was even read. She felt that ache her whole life. It never broke her, it sharpened her. After the meeting, the corridor buzzed with jokes about her. "Maybe she wants to realign the base with moon gravity," someone snickered in the mess hall. Rhino's booming voice carried across the room, uncaring that she could hear every word. She ate slowly, methodically, the way soldiers do when food is fuel, not comfort. Her expression never changed. That unsettled them more than outrage would have. Her stillness was unnerving because it wasn't passive. It was patience. The base shunned her within 48 hours. Access denied. Clearances cut. Doors politely closed in her face. She was escorted everywhere by a young lieutenant named Carter, anxious, kind in small ways but far too afraid of Colonel Thorne to question anything. He saw where she spent her nights, not in the admin wing, not writing reports, not resting. She walked the perimeter, studied the sensor towers, examined power conduits, memorized the ground's subtle vibrations beneath her boots. She didn't need their data. The base itself was telling her a story. Sometimes she stood alone on the landing strip at dusk, the twin suns staining the clouds with violent purples. Wind carried dust across her boots. Carter once warned her of an approaching desert storm. She didn't move. "The wind provides cover," she murmured. "For what?" he asked, puzzled. Her gray eyes found the horizon. There was no fear in them, only certainty, cold and steady. "For an assault." Those words echoed through Carter's mind long after he left her standing there. He reported it to Thorne, who laughed, who mocked, who dismissed her once again. The storm came at nightfall, not with violence but with a suffocating hum. Visibility vanished. Power flickered. Sensors choked on interference. The world shrank to the red glow of emergency lights. The base was blind. And that was when the first substation died. A red blink, then another, then 479. A cascade. Sharma's voice trembled. "Sir, we've lost the primary grid." Backup power didn't engage. Turrets died. Barriers collapsed. The CIC went black except for the emergency glow. The storm howled outside, drowning their world into a void. Rhino's voice tore through the comms, panicked. "They're coming out of the ground. They tunneled under us. Heavy armor." At the same moment, mortars incoming on the north wall. Chaos erupted. Officers shouted over one another. Thorne barked orders no one could execute. Fear spread like wildfire. And through it all, she stood utterly still. The storm had arrived exactly when they needed it, exactly how she had predicted. She stepped away from the wall, moving through shadows as if she'd trained her entire life for this precise moment. She knelt before an old, unlabeled panel, the kind no one touched anymore, a relic from when the base was first built. She opened it with a tool she carried like a ritual object. Carter stared, breathless. "Ma'am, that system hasn't been used in years." "The enemy is inside our network," she said, voice calm amid the panic. "But they won't be looking for this." She rewired the system manually. A forgotten geothermal tap hummed awake. A single row of lights flickered on. A hardline comm came alive with a beep. Sharma gasped. I have an isolated channel, point-to-point only, but it works." Colonel Thorne turned toward her, stunned. "How did you?" She didn't answer him, not yet. Not when there were lives to save. Instead, she gave Sharma orders no civilian should have known by heart. Special ops code phrases. Emergency protocols used only in catastrophic breaches. Sharma obeyed immediately, fear and awe warring in her eyes. Then Vance finally turned toward Thorne. Her voice was soft, but it hit the room like a hammer. "Your strategy is failing, Colonel." Thorne's jaw clenched. "You are out of line. Your men are dying." Her words froze everyone. A breath, a beat. "They're expecting you to panic," she continued. "They want you at the western gate, but that's not their target." She pointed downward. "They're coming for the command node, this room." That was when the first rifle burst cracked against the CIC door. The infiltrators were inside. Everyone froze, everyone except her. She moved. A fluid blur. She took a rifle from a terrified guard, checked it with the confidence of someone who'd lived a lifetime behind a trigger, then positioned herself at the doorway. "Carter," she said quietly, "barricade it." The door blew inward. 3 intruders rushed in. 3 shots echoed, controlled, perfect. 3 bodies hit the floor. Silence fell. War had entered their walls. But so had something else, something the base had never truly seen until that moment. Her truth. And no one would ever see her as the new girl again. How did a room full of trained soldiers end up hiding behind consoles, waiting for her to tell them what to do? The smoke from the breached doorway drifted slowly across the CIC, carrying the bitter metallic scent of detonated charges. The bodies of the infiltrators lay where they fell, silent, armored shadows that had nearly reached the heart of the base. Vance stood over them with a stillness that felt almost unreal, not triumphant, not shaken, just focused. She didn't look like someone who had just killed 3 men. She looked like someone who had expected them. "Carter," she said quietly, her voice steady against the rattling storm outside. "Hold the door. Shoot anything that's not one of ours." The young lieutenant swallowed hard and took the rifle she handed him. His hands trembled. His breathing was sharp, but he obeyed because she had spoken with the certainty of someone who understood storms far greater than this one. She moved to the floor hatch like a person who had walked these halls long before anyone else. The others stared at her as if she'd stepped out of a myth, something that didn't quite belong to the world they thought they understood. A small figure disappearing into the darkness beneath the CIC, leaving behind a room full of people who suddenly felt like they had been living their lives half awake. No one spoke until the hatch closed. Someone whispered, "Who the hell is she?" No one had an answer. The storm above roared like a living creature as she descended into the base's sublevels. The air grew colder. The lights were dead. Every sound echoed, her boots, the distant thump of enemy machinery tunneling through the earth, the groan of metal stressed beyond design. She didn't hesitate. Fear never entered her. She walked as though she'd memorized every pipe, every shadow, every cable the moment she stepped foot on the base. When she reached the primary nexus, she knelt beside a dead console, wiped dust from a forgotten control panel, and cracked it open with one clean twist of her wrist. 3 minutes later, the internal sensors flickered awake. Above her, men and women who had mocked her were now hearing her voice in their comms. Calm, precise, unflinching. "Sector Delta, 2 hostiles moving through Maintenance Corridor B7. Cut them off at the junction. Do not pursue deeper. Rhino, flank right. No farther than the access ramp, you'll hit a pressure trap." Carter reinforced the CIC door. "They're probing for another breach." Each instruction arrived seconds before danger. Somehow, impossibly, she was reading the battle in real time, interpreting tunnel vibrations the sensors barely captured, predicting enemy shifts that no algorithm had mapped. And in doing so, she was slowly pulling Fob Arabis back from the brink. When she finally returned to the CIC, face streaked with dust, hands blackened by machinery, the chaos had transformed. Thorne was at the comm station, voice steady for the first time as he ordered his troops to hold. Rhino's platoon was pushing back. Sharma was directing drones. A fragile pattern of hope had begun to form. It all paused when she stepped through the door. Every soldier rose instinctively. Not ordered, not commanded. Something deeper. Thorne approached her. He tried to speak, but no words came, just a look of a man realizing he'd been blind. She gave a curt nod, acknowledging him without judgment, then turned to the tactical display. "We're not done," she said. "Secure the remaining sublevel passageways. The northern tunnels are still active." "We're on it," Sharma replied immediately, fingers flying over her console. Within minutes, the last infiltration team was cornered. Rhino's men stormed the passage, adrenaline sharp, gunfire echoing beneath the base. It was brutal, close, almost feral, but they finished it. The base would live through the night. For now. When dawn finally split the sky, the storm died with it. Golden light spilled across destruction, cratered earth, collapsed walls, burned out vehicles. Medics moved among the wounded. Engineers dragged shattered turrets back into place. The once mocking base was silent with exhaustion, grief, and something else. Reverence. Inside the CIC, Thorne sat alone at a terminal. His hands shook as he typed her name into the top-secret search field. Vance Aura. When her file opened, his breath left him. Not Miss Vance. Not an auditor. Not a civilian. General Aura Vance. Call sign Nix. A classified legend. A ghost story whispered in special operations circles, the architect behind impossible missions, the strategist who would walk alone into hostile territory and dismantle entire networks without ever firing a shot, the one commanders feared and enemies prayed they'd never meet. She'd been in the room with them the entire time, and they'd treated her like a joke. Sharma saw the screen and froze. She whispered the name with awe. Nix. The word spread through the CIC in seconds. No shouts, no panic, just silent realization breaking across every face like a rising sun. Carter's throat tightened. He remembered leading her to the admin block, offering directions like she was helpless. He felt sick. Rhino, hearing the news near the western gate, nearly tore off his helmet in disbelief. All those jokes, all that arrogance, all those loud, thoughtless words. Shame hit him harder than any enemy weapon ever had. When she finally emerged into the CIC again, the room went dead silent. Then, as if pulled by one shared instinct, every soldier stood at attention. Thorne stepped forward. His throat worked once, twice, before his voice finally came. General Vance, FOB Erebus is secure. We await your orders. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask forgiveness. He simply offered the only thing that mattered. Respect. She returned his salute with a quiet, measured grace, not a hint of triumph, not a flicker of judgment. Proceed with your report, Colonel. Work resumed around her, but the air had changed. The base moved differently, quieter, disciplined, decisive, because a myth was walking their halls and they were witnesses. Sharma brought up the deep scan analysis Vance had predicted from the start. The tunnel network was far larger than anyone had known. The assault had been the first wave, not the last. They were preparing to move an entire battalion underground, Sharma said. Vance nodded, expression unreadable, and they will return. Rhino saw her at the western gate hours later, boots on scorched earth, gaze fixed on the horizon. Dust and blood streaked across her uniform, exhaustion pulling at her features. He approached her with more humility than he'd ever shown another human being. He couldn't even bring himself to salute. Instead, he bowed his head. A warrior's acknowledgement. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once softly. A forgiveness without words. Some wounds heal in silence. Later, as the sun climbed higher and engineers worked to rebuild the broken base, Vance walked through Erebus, not as the new girl, as their anchor, their myth, their truth revealed. Soldiers stopped what they were doing. Some saluted. Some simply watched with quiet awe. She didn't bask in it. She didn't slow her stride. She moved with quiet purpose, like respect was a weight she carried with caution. By nightfall, the base had rebuilt enough to stand, but the horizon held more shadows. The enemy was regrouping, preparing, learning. She knew this was only the beginning. Victory was just a pause. War was still coming, and she could feel it in her bones. A story she'd lived too many times, a cycle she'd broken for others but never for herself. Yet there was no fear in her, only resolve, and a truth that echoed softly in her chest. They had mocked the wrong woman. Why did Dawn feel heavier than the battle itself? Like the silence after survival was its own kind of burden. Ara Vance stood on the highest observation deck, looking out over the desert as if she could see beyond the horizon. The air was cool still, pretending nothing had happened the night before. But the scars below told a different truth. Twisted metal, scorched earth, craters where walls once stood. Erebus had been attacked, broken open, nearly gutted. And she had saved it. But she didn't look victorious. She looked distant, as if her mind was already 3 steps ahead, walking through battles no one else could see. She held a steaming mug of black coffee between her palms, the heat a small comfort against the exhaustion threatening to pull her under. She hadn't slept, not even for a minute. She didn't need rest, not when the enemy was still out there. Carter approached quietly, a data slate in hand. He hesitated before speaking, not out of fear but respect. "General," he said. She glanced at him with those steady gray eyes, eyes that saw too much, carried too much. "Drone recon is complete," he reported. "We found them, or at least where they're gathering." He handed her the slate. She didn't react outwardly, but Carter saw the way her fingers tightened just slightly on the mug. The thermal scans showed deep ravines, natural cover hiding unnatural numbers, thousands of heat signatures clustered in the shadows, heavy vehicles, siege equipment, enough force to crush 3 bases the size of Erebus. "They're larger than we anticipated," Carter said quietly. "A full division, maybe more." She studied the patterns of heat, the alignment, the geological fault line that Sharma's team had highlighted, a thin red scar running from the ravine beneath the desert floor straight toward Erebus. A knife pointed at their heart. "They're done with probing," Vance murmured. "No more shadows, no more tunnels. This time they'll come openly." Carter's jaw tightened. "Can we hold, ma'am?" His voice cracked on the last word, not weakness, but fear of the brutal truth he knew was coming. She didn't soften it. "No." He swallowed, throat tight. "But our reinforcements are still 3 days out," he said. "If they attack now, we won't be here when they arrive." Carter froze. "Ma'am, what?" She turned toward him fully now. Her gaze wasn't harsh, it wasn't cold, it was clear. "A fortress is a disadvantage when your enemy knows how to break it," she said. "Erebus has served its purpose. Now it's nothing but bait." He stared at her, struggling to understand. "You're abandoning the base." "We're transforming it," she corrected softly, "into a weapon." She handed the slate back to him. "Tell Colonel Thorne to prepare every combat-capable vehicle for immediate departure. Strip the base, ammo, fuel, water. Leave everything else." "What about the tunnels?" "Sergeant Davies will rig them with explosives. The charges must be placed on critical load-bearing points." Carter nodded, still processing, still stunned. "And Specialist Sharma?" he asked. "She'll wipe the servers, all sensitive intel, then program a single repeating broadcast loop for any enemy comms sweep." "What kind of message?" Vance looked back toward the empty horizon. The sun caught her eyes for a moment, turning them silver. "A welcome message." Carter blinked. "For the enemy. For the grave they're about to walk into." The wind picked up slightly, warm, dry, carrying the faint scent of dust and machine oil. Carter felt his skin prickle. He had followed commanders before. He had trusted good officers. But this felt like following a storm dressed in human form. He stood straighter. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She gave him one long, measuring look. Not judgment, not expectation. "Assessment." "You did well last night," she said quietly. Carter felt his breath hitch. Coming from her, those words felt like medals. "Go," she added. He ran. Below, the base erupted into controlled chaos. Soldiers moved quickly, quietly. No shouting, no confusion. The transformation was immediate. Discipline had taken root like a shockwave. Thorne issued orders with clarity and humility. Rhino pulled his tunnel hunters out one by one, each emerging coated in dust, sweat, and the heavy stench of fear, but they obeyed without hesitation. Sharma wiped the servers, erased every trace of their classified systems, then programmed the repeating message. A simple tone, a greeting. "A trap." Vance walked among them without raising her voice, without drawing attention, and yet attention followed her like gravity. Some saluted, most simply nodded, the nod of those who had seen death and recognized the only reason they were not part of it. Rhino caught sight of her near the motor pool. Her sleeves rolled up as she checked the undercarriage of an armored transport. "General," he said, stepping forward. She didn't look up. Sergeant Davies. He swallowed. His voice wasn't as steady as he wanted it to be. About before, the mess hall, the comments, we were idiots. She tightened a bolt with one quick twist. Yes. He blinked, startled. No sugarcoating, no false politeness, just truth. But she added, you fought well, you stayed alive, keep doing that. Rhino felt something tighten inside his chest. Respect, gratitude, a desire to be better than he'd been. He nodded, stepping back. As noon approached, the vehicles lined up outside the gates, armored carriers, troop transports, supply trucks. Engines rumbled low, restless. Vance climbed into the lead command vehicle. Thorne approached her window, his face drawn but resolute. General, he said, not a hint of ego left. We're ready. She studied him for a moment. Colonel, what happened yesterday will not define you, she said quietly. But what you choose next will. Thorne felt emotion tighten in his throat, raw and stinging. Yes, ma'am. Fall in behind me. She gave one sharp gesture. Rhino barked orders, engines roared. And just like that, Fob Erebus emptied. A silent exodus into the desert. No cheers, no goodbyes, no backward glances. Only purpose. And Vance. Always Vance. When the last vehicle disappeared into the dust, the base stood quiet under the hot sun, a hollow fortress waiting for the enemy. Waiting to become their tomb. Hours later, deep in the ravines, the enemy began their advance. They moved with confidence, arrogance, strength in overwhelming numbers. They marched toward Erebus like it was already theirs. But the woman they had underestimated was not at the base. She was behind them. Hunting. Creating a new battlefield on her terms. And in the silence of the desert, as the convoy continued forward, her internal voice, a voice she rarely let surface, whispered the truth she lived by. Sometimes the only way to win is to stop being what they expect. Sometimes the strongest walls are the ones you walk away from. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the desert feel louder now, like it was holding its breath, waiting for the moment she finally struck back? The convoy moved in a long, silent column across the Aridian basin. Engines rumbled, sending tremors through the cracked earth. Dust rose behind them like a ghostly tail stretching toward the horizon. No one spoke. No one dared break the tension that wound through every vehicle like wire pulled tight. Inside the lead command transport, Aura Vance sat in the passenger seat, one boot braced against the dash, hands resting loosely in her lap. She wasn't looking at the map display. She wasn't looking at the rear cameras tracking their trail. She was staring straight ahead, eyes narrowed, distant, unreadable. Carter drove beside her, knuckles white on the wheel. He kept glancing at her, trying to decipher the silence. Even when she wasn't speaking, she felt like a presence that filled every inch of space, quiet, controlled, dangerous in a way that didn't need to announce itself. Finally, he cleared his throat. Ma'am, permission to ask something. She didn't look away from the horizon. Ask. When you first arrived, you knew. About the tunnels, about the enemy, all of it, how? A slow breath escaped her. Not irritation, not pride. Something heavier, older. I've seen this pattern before, she said quietly. Years ago, different terrain, different enemy, same arrogance. Carter felt a chill crawl up his spine. Did we win that one? He asked. She didn't answer at first. The hum of the engine filled the pause. Finally, we survived, she said. Sometimes survival is the only victory war lets you keep. She didn't need to say it for him to feel it. Behind them, Rhino's platoon rumbled in tight formation. His voice crackled through the radio, sharp, disciplined, not a hint of the old swagger. All charges placed, General, tunnels primed. Whoever walks into Erebus is not walking out. Vance lifted the mic. "Well done, Sergeant. Fall back and regroup." "Copy that." The radio clicked off. Carter watched the dunes shifting gently under the scorching sun. The desert looked peaceful now, deceptively so, like a battlefield pretending to be harmless. "Ma'am," he said after a beat, "what's our plan once they hit the base?" Vance lowered the mic, fingers tapping once against the casing. "We wait." "For what?" "For them to commit, for their commanders to move into the center, for their armor to choke the corridors. And when they believe they have won," she lifted her eyes, voice dropping into something cold enough to freeze the air, "Davies will bring the ground down beneath them." Carter swallowed. "And us?" Her stare fixed again on the endless stretch of sand. "We'll already be cutting off their retreat." A shiver ran through him. Vengeance, strategy, survival, all woven into one sentence. But there was something else beneath her tone, something almost painful, so subtle he might have missed it if he wasn't watching her profile carefully. Loneliness. Even victory felt like a weight she had to carry alone. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Heat rippled across the desert, turning the air into shimmering curtains. The convoy slowed as they reached a series of jagged ridges, natural cover carved by centuries of relentless wind. From here they could watch Erebus, wait for the storm to fall on their abandoned fortress. Inside the vehicle, Vance finally stood. "Stop here," she said. Carter braked. The tires sank into the sand with a soft crunch. She stepped out, boots hitting the ground with silent finality. The wind whipped her hair loose from its bun, strands catching the light like threads of silver. She walked to the edge of the ridge and stood tall, framed against the vast empty world stretching below. Thorne approached her cautiously. "General," he said, "scouts confirm movement. The enemy has begun advancing toward Erebus." She didn't look at him. Her eyes tracked distant dust clouds, columns of soldiers and armor marching straight into her trap. "Good," she said. Thorne shifted uneasily. "You're sure abandoning the base is the right move?" She remained silent for several seconds. "When you build a wall," she said softly, "your enemy spends their time learning how to break it. When you tear that wall down yourself, the enemy loses their plan." Thorne lowered his gaze, humbled again. "I wish I had seen what you saw," he murmured. She didn't offer comfort. "You see now," she replied simply. "Sometimes growth is just admitting how blind you were." The sun dipped lower as hours passed. Finally Sharma rushed over, panting, a tablet in hand. "General Thermal confirms it. The enemy commander has entered the base. Their armor units are in the courtyard, infantry in the corridors, full commitment." Vance didn't blink. "Detonate." Rhino's voice crackled over the radio, steady despite the enormity of what he was about to do. "Charges armed, on your word." She exhaled once. A breath shaped by memory, by ghosts, by battles that never really ended. "Now." A tremor rolled through the desert floor. Then another. Then the horizon bloomed into a rising plume of dust and fire as Erebus, once their burden, now their trap, collapsed inward like a dying star. Not in a single explosion, but in a series of deep, resonant shocks as the tunnels gave way. The earth swallowed steel, swallowed bodies, swallowed pride. Carter watched the destruction with wide, terrified eyes. Rhino whispered a curse. Thorne's hand shook. But Vance didn't move. Her face didn't change. Because victory never tasted sweet when it came with death, even enemy death. Relief and sorrow lived side by side behind her eyes, locked in quiet war. Carter finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, how did you know that they'd take the bait, that they'd commit fully?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped away from the ridge and sat in the sand, cross-legged, still, the wind tugging at her fatigues. She looked small suddenly, not fragile, just human. They were arrogant, she said. Arrogant commanders always want a trophy. Carter sat beside her, leaving space between them. Her voice softened, almost lost to the wind. I've seen this pattern before, she admitted. Years ago. We abandoned an outpost then too, sacrificed it to save thousands. It worked. Carter looked at her carefully. What happened after that one? He asked. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes drifted far away, somewhere she didn't want to return to. We lost the commander who made the call, she whispered. He stayed behind to trigger the charges. He wanted to be sure. Silence wrapped around them. Carter swallowed, guilt tightening his chest. Did you serve under him? She nodded slowly. He taught me that sometimes survival requires letting go of what you're trying so hard to defend. A breath trembled out of her. And sometimes it requires walking away from the people you care about. Carter didn't know what to say. So he said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only language heavy truths understand. The plume of dust over Erebus began to settle. Sharma approached quietly. General, enemy communications are in chaos. They've lost their entire forward command. They're retreating. Vance didn't react. She just stood up. We're not done, she said. Rhino frowned. General, the base is gone. Their force is shattered. What more? Retreat doesn't mean defeat, she cut in. It means regrouping, planning, waiting to strike again. She looked out over the far horizon, toward the enemy's homeland, their supply lines, their sanctuaries. This wasn't victory, she said quietly. Carter's heartbeat quickened. Then what was it? He asked. Her eyes hardened, sharp and cold as the desert night. The opening move. Why did the quiet after an explosion feel more dangerous than the battle itself? Like the world was pausing just long enough to decide what to break next. Smoke drifted across the desert like a fading memory of fire. The ruins of Fob Erebus were a distant smear on the horizon now, half buried, half broken, swallowed by dust and silence. The enemy had taken the bait. They had been buried along with their pride. But Ara Vance stood rigid, hands clasped behind her back, gaze fixed on the farthest stretch of desert, not on the fallen base, not on the wreckage. On the direction the enemy would retreat to. On the path they would take when they regrouped. Sharma approached slowly, tablet pressed against her chest. General, the remaining enemy forces are pulling back toward the ravines. Scatter formation. Some are fleeing outright. Some, Vance repeated softly. Sharma hesitated, not all. No, Vance murmured, not all. The survivors weren't retreating blindly. They weren't shattered beyond repair. They were angry. And anger in war was fuel. Behind her, engines rumbled as the convoy repositioned on the ridge. Rhino's platoon refueled, reloaded, checked armor plates with a grim efficiency. Thorne stood near the command vehicle, speaking quietly into his comm, issuing orders like a man reborn from his own ashes. The soldiers weren't celebrating, not even close. They were preparing. Carter jogged toward Vance, stopping beside her with a breathless, "General, scouts found tracks. Enemy vehicles are converging east, possibly regrouping for counterassault." Vance didn't look at him. They won't attack now. They'll retreat deeper into protected territory. Then what are we waiting for? Carter asked. She turned her head slightly, eyes glinting with something sharp, something Carter hadn't learned to read yet. We're going after them, she said. The words hit him like a punch. Ma'am, our forces are exhausted. The base is gone. We haven't slept in almost 2 days. We chase, she cut in, not unkindly but with a finality that left him breathless. We press them before they can rebuild, before they call reinforcements, before their commanders realize what or who they just lost. Carter exhaled shakily. Isn't that what they expect us to do? Her answer came as a whisper. No, they expect us to rest. Sometimes the most dangerous move is to refuse the pause the enemy is waiting for. She walked past him, moving toward the waiting convoy with a quiet determination that was almost frightening. Carter followed, unable to stop watching the way she carried herself, shoulders straight, expression unbroken, every step measured. Thorne met her halfway. "General," he said, voice low but steady, "the men, they'll follow you, wherever, but they need a plan." "They'll have one," she said, "as soon as I see what the enemy left behind." She climbed into the command transport again, and Thorne and Sharma crowded around a portable holomap spread across the dashboard. Vance traced the enemy's retreat path with a gloved finger. "They're heading to the canyon system here, a natural choke point. 2 possible entry routes, both defensible. If they regroup there, they can hold out until reinforcements arrive." Rhino scoffed under his breath. "Reinforcements, after what we did to them?" Vance didn't look up. Humiliated armies call for help faster than victorious ones. Silence settled like dust. Carter felt something uneasy twist in his gut. "General, what exactly are we doing out here, if the enemy still has thousands?" "They don't," she said. He frowned. "Ma'am." She zoomed in on the map, highlighting multiple splintered heat signatures scattered across the terrain. "The division moved toward Arabis in waves," she explained. "Their main command and their heaviest armor entered the base. The rest were supply lines and reserve units." "And the explosion wiped out their center," Sharma added, comprehension dawning on her face. Vance nodded. "They're leaderless," she said. "Scared, scattered, dangerous but unstable." Carter's voice dropped. "So they're vulnerable." "Everyone's vulnerable when they don't know who they're taking orders from." Something in her tone made the entire convoy lean in closer, made hearts beat faster, made fear and hope blend together into something sharp and exhilarating. Thorne asked, "What's the objective?" Vance finally looked up. "To end this." Rhino let out a low whistle. "General, we're a single convoy in the middle of nowhere." "We're not trying to defeat an army," she said. "We're hunting what controls it." Carter's breath froze. "The enemy command," he whispered. Her gaze held his. "Yes." The wind swept across the ridge, carrying sand across their boots. Sharma shifted uneasily. "General, even if we find their main commander." "We will," Vance said, "no doubt. No hesitation, not a sliver." "Even then, it's a suicide plan, ma'am." "No," Vance replied. "It's a calculated risk." Rhino muttered, "Feels like a fancy way of saying suicide." Her eyes lifted toward the far horizon. "When I was younger," she said, voice strangely soft, "I learned a truth about war." Everyone leaned in instinctively. "It doesn't matter how many soldiers you fight. It matters who you break." A long, quiet hush fell over the group. She continued, "Armies don't move because thousands march. They move because a handful command them to." Carter swallowed hard. "So if you break the commander, you break the war." Thorne drew a slow breath, the weight of her strategy settling onto his shoulders. "General," he said quietly, "if we do this, there's no turning back." "There never was," she replied. The convoy rolled out again. Not toward safety, not toward the ruins of Arabis, but toward the enemy's heart. The desert shifted beneath their wheels as if warning them, testing them, challenging them. Night began to creep in as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky in molten orange and deep crimson. Shadows stretched across the sand like clawed hands. Hours later, they reached the edge of the canyon system. The world fell silent again. The ravines were deep, dark, a maze of jagged stone and ancient pathways shaped by time and violence, an ideal place for an army to hide. An ideal place for a trap. The engines shut off one by one, leaving only the whisper of wind through stone. Carter climbed out, legs stiff, chest tight with anticipation. Rhino and his platoon fanned out along the ridge. Thorne approached cautiously, scanning the landscape with binoculars. "Nothing yet," he said. "Movement's minimal, they're hiding." "They think hiding protects them," Vance murmured. Carter glanced at her. "Doesn't it?" She crouched beside the canyon edge, examining the rock, its fractures, its fault lines, the patterns the wind carved across it. "When you're afraid," she said softly, "you hide in places you understand." She ran her hand along the stone, feeling the vibrations. "And when you're hunted," she whispered, "you never hide where your enemy doesn't expect to look." Carter felt his throat tighten. "General, what are you saying?" She rose slowly, turning toward him. "They're not in the canyon," she said. Sharma frowned sharply. "Ma'am, thermal scans show." "Thermals can be faked," Vance cut in. "Sensors jammed, heat signatures played back. They're trying to lure us into that canyon." Rhino tensed. "So where the hell are they?" Vance stepped past them, looking not down into the ravines, but across the desert, toward the mountains in the far distance. "They're moving north," she said, "fast." Carter blinked. "How do you know?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Because that's what I would do." Carter felt his pulse thudding in his ears. Sharma stared at her, breath caught. Thorne whispered, "General, you're thinking like their commander." Vance's expression hardened, the desert wind brushing past her like an old companion. "No," she said quietly. "I'm thinking like the commander who trained him." A chill swept through the entire convoy. Someone she knew. Someone she had hunted before. Someone who had learned from her and broken away. Carter's voice cracked. "General, who are we really fighting?" Vance closed her eyes briefly, just long enough for pain to flicker across her face like a wound reopening. Then she answered. "A ghost," she whispered. "A shadow from a war I never finished. And this time, he's waiting for me." Why did the night feel familiar? Like she had been here before, standing on the edge of a battle she never wanted but always knew would come. The desert wind cut across the convoy in cold, thin breaths as darkness finally swallowed the horizon. Headlights flicked off one by one until only starlight remained, sharp, endless, watching. The men huddled behind vehicles and rock formations, checking weapons, whispering in low tones, casting nervous glances toward the lone figure standing in front of them. Ara Vance didn't move. She stood at the edge of the ridge, eyes fixed on the dark northern expanse beyond the canyon. The air around her felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. Carter approached slowly, hesitant, as if stepping into someone else's grief. "General," he said quietly, "who are we facing?" Her jaw tightened, a betrayal of emotion she rarely allowed to surface. "A man I once trusted," she replied. "Someone who learned everything I had to teach and twisted it into something ruthless." Carter's chest tightened. "You trained the enemy commander." "I did." Rhino stepped closer, his voice rough. "And he's expecting you." "Yes." Silence stretched between them, not fear, not shame. Recognition. Some wars start long before the first shot is fired. Thorne approached, holding a map lit only by a dim red lamp. "General," he said, voice taut, "you were right. Scouts found tracks fresh, multiple heavy transports. They bypassed the canyon and moved north into the mountain passes." Sharma added, "They're regrouping fast, and based on intercepted comms fragments, they keep referring to a single call sign, repeatedly." Carter swallowed. "What call sign?" Vance turned to them slowly. "Wraith." A cold ripple swept through the group. Sharma whispered, "General, the Wraith, the ghost commander from the Black Reef operations. The one who—" "Yes," Vance said quietly. "The one who vanished. The one who defected. The one who betrayed her unit and her." Rhino stared at her, stunned. General, you fought him before. Her eyes lowered for the first time. No, she said. I refused to fight him. That was my mistake. There was no time for questions. Not now. Vance raised her chin, gaze hardening. We move in 30 minutes. Quiet approach. Engines at minimum. We hit their command at dawn. Thorne frowned. General, if he knows your tactics. Then I'll use the one thing he never understood. What is that? Restraint. Some commanders win by force. Others by chaos. She won by patience. The convoy moved under starlight, slow and deliberate. Engines hummed at barely audible levels. Tires rolled silently over sand and stone. Every soldier strained their eyes toward the mountains, toward shadows that shifted like predators. Carter drove again, sneaking occasional glances at Vance. Her posture was rigid, every muscle braced. Not for battle, for something deeper, something personal. Ma'am, he said softly, you don't have to face him alone. She didn't answer, but her silence was not rejection. It was protection. The mountain pass came into view, narrow, jagged, lit only by the pale glow of the moon. A winding path rose between towering cliffs, perfect for ambush, perfect for traps. Vance stepped out first, scanning the terrain. Sharma whispered, thermals show about 100 troops ahead, but the readings are strange, like they're spaced too evenly. Vance nodded. Decoys. Carter blinked. So where are the real soldiers? Vance pointed to the cliff shadows. There. Movement glimmered faintly, flickers of reflective optics. Snipers, spotters, forward scouts, watching, waiting. Rhino growled, they're boxing us in. No, Vance replied. They're waiting for their commander to engage. Carter's heart pounded. Why? Vance stared into the shadows. Because he wants me alive. A chill ran down every spine. Suddenly, a voice echoed through a hidden speaker embedded in the cliffside. Distorted, calm, chilling. Nix. Carter flinched. Rhino stepped back, cursing under his breath. Vance did not move. Her breath hitched only once, and even that she controlled instantly. The voice continued. I wondered how long it would take before you came for me. Sharma whispered, he's been tracking us. Vance lifted her chin. Wraith. The voice chuckled, a low, mocking sound. You taught me well, he said. Too well, blowing up Erebus. Yes, I felt your hand in that. Cold, efficient, predictable. Vance's fingers curled at her sides. You killed your own men, she said. For what? Territory, ego. No, Wraith replied. For the same reason you walked into my trap. A pause. Closure. Carter felt ice spread through his bones. General, he whispered, this is personal for him. For both of us, she murmured. The cliffs erupted. Hidden spotlights snapped on, flooding the pass with blinding white light. Snipers revealed their positions, dozens of them. Heavy gunners rotated toward the convoy. Infantry poured from camouflaged bunkers. Rhino yelled, ambush. Thorne shouted, defensive positions. Carter grabbed his rifle. And Vance raised her hand. Everyone froze. She stepped forward alone, into the open light, rifle slung across her back, hands empty. Carter gasped, ma'am. Rhino surged forward, but Thorne held him back. No, Sergeant, let her. It felt like watching a myth walk into fire. Vance approached the center of the pass as figures emerged from the shadows. At their head was a tall shape, armor dark, visor glinting with a cruel metallic sheen. Wraith. He removed his helmet slowly. And for the first time, Carter saw the face of the man who haunted her past. Sharp features, cold eyes, a thin scar along his jaw. A ghost made real. He smiled. You always did prefer walking into danger rather than shooting it. Vance's voice was steel. You didn't have to become this. Oh, but I did, he replied. You taught me to see weakness in every command, every strategy, every commander. He spread his arms. And tell me, was I wrong? You were, she whispered, because you forgot the one thing I never taught you. His brow lifted. And what's that? That strength means nothing without restraint. He scoffed. Restraint is how soldiers die. No, she said, it's how leaders live. The air trembled. No one moved. Then Vance reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, a single button. Wraith's eyes narrowed. What is that? The second trap, she murmured. She pressed it. A deep rumble shook the mountains. Charges placed earlier by Rhino's tunnel hunters detonated, not in the canyon, not in the pass, but along the upper ridge where Wraith's hidden artillery and reinforcement units were waiting. The mountain roared as stone shattered, collapsing down upon the enemy's rear lines. Snipers fell, artillery crushed, supply units buried. Wraith spun shocked. And for the first time, he looked afraid. Vance stepped forward, eyes burning. You learned my tactics, she said softly, but you never learned my patience. Chaos erupted. Enemy fire rained down. Rhino's platoon surged forward. Thorne shouted orders. Carter fired until his arms shook. But in the center of the maelstrom, Vance and Wraith moved toward each other like two storms colliding. He raised his rifle. She deflected with a brutal strike. He swung the butt of the weapon. She ducked, countering with a knee to his ribs. Dust swirled around them in a violent dance. They were evenly matched, teacher and student, predator and prey, past and present tearing at each other in the dark. Wraith grabbed her throat. You should have killed me back then, he snarled. Vance forced his grip away, voice hoarse but unbroken. I never kill what I can still redeem. He hesitated. Just for a moment. And that was enough. She drove her elbow into his sternum, knocking the wind out of him. He stumbled. She disarmed him, the rifle clattering into the dust. She aimed it at his chest. He stared at her. So this is it, he breathed. Nix, General Ara, are you really going to pull the trigger? She held the rifle steady, no trembling, no hesitation. And then softly, softly enough that only he could hear. No. Wraith blinked. Confusion, anger, something like shame flickered in his eyes. She lowered the rifle. You lost the war the moment you chose fear over honor, she said. I won't make the same mistake. He stepped back, breath shaking, as if the mercy cut deeper than any wound. Rhino rushed in, pinning Wraith to the ground. Thorne moved to secure the remaining enemy officers. Sharma signaled to the convoy. All enemy units surrendering, she called. It's over. Carter approached Vance slowly. She looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally, like the battle had taken something from her that she never planned to give. General, he whispered, are you okay? She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the fallen mountain, the quieting battlefield, the rising sun painting the desert gold. Finally she spoke. I'm tired, she said, but this time it's a good kind of tired. He nodded. Was it worth it? He asked softly. Her gaze softened. Yes, because restraint is still stronger than rage. The wind carried her next words gently across the battlefield. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. She looked toward the captured Wraith, silent in Rhino's grip. It simply acts. She turned toward her soldiers, her family now, and walked forward into the new dawn.